Good morning, good afternoon, hello, wherever and wherever you're joining us, and thank you so much for taking some time out today to come spend some time with us. My name is Nick Gallimore. I'm Director of Talent Transformation and Insight here at Clear Review. For those of you who aren't familiar with Clear Review, we're an HR technology company with a real passion for performance management. And that passion is something of mine as well. I've spent the past 15 years of my career solely in the talent management space. I've spent a big chunk of that time challenging the status quo around how we think about talent, particularly how we identify and develop potential and performance. And I have to say, I've spent a very significant part of that time wondering why something as fundamental as driving and developing performance is often undervalued, impersonal, and frankly, totally ineffective. And I'm very fortunate that I now get to spend the majority of my time working with organisations up and down the country to plan or execute people transformation projects with a real focus on performance management and development. Now, today is the latest in a series of webinars we've been running throughout the past 18 months in partnership both with the Clear Review Academy and with our very good friends at HR Grapevine, sharing our views on the latest trends happening in the talent and people management space. Now, it sounds a bit strange saying this, but we've covered quite a lot of ground in that time, and perhaps we've covered ground that we hadn't anticipated covering a couple of years ago, from things like how to make the best of remote working, how to drive well-being and engagement whilst in lockdown, making the best of the move to hybrid working, how do we solve the productivity and engagement challenges that we all face, and most recently sharing some reflections on one of the things that we're all talking about at the moment, this concept of the Great Resignation. Now, today's session is going to be a little bit different. We're going to take a slightly different journey through it, but I do hope you enjoy the conversation. You'll see by now I'm joined today by two awesome guests who hopefully are going to help me go on a reflective journey back to the very start of this entire period of time, and to help me answer the questions of what happens next. Now, if you've got any questions today, please feel free to drop them in the box. If we get time to get to them today, we will. Otherwise, we'll circle back separately afterwards. Now, just before we get into it, just before I get to introduce my two very special guests, just a bit of a primer on Clear Review. Now, I'm aware that many of you today may well be familiar with this already. You might be kind of joining us through the Clear Review Academy, but equally, for those of you who perhaps haven't come across us before, you might benefit from a bit of background. So Clear Review was founded in 2017 with a really simple aim. That aim was to take some established workforce psychology and design and deliver performance management technology, which actually helps to improve the performance of people at work. All of that was built in the very, very firm belief that most traditional approaches to performance management, and as I say the words performance management, you might conjure up images of things like annual objectives, heavy end-of-year appraisals, kind of occasional and suboptimal conversations, performance ratings, things like that, simply don't work. We know they're largely effective at helping improve performance and are largely disliked by most of the people involved in them. Our continuous performance management solution, built around the core performance development principles of agile goal setting, real-time feedback, and regular, meaningful conversations, provides an escape to this misery of performance management, and has really driven some amazing results for a number of our top-tier customers, including hopefully the two on the call that I've got with me today. And obviously, just kind of one last thing before I move on. Over the past year, we've been on our own journey here at Clear Review, having been acquired by Advanced around about a year ago now, and been through the process of getting to know new colleagues, despite not having been able to physically meet until very recently. And together we now we remain absolutely committed to providing innovation in the space and helping companies change work for the better. And final plug of the day, we were delighted earlier this year to be named the Learning Solution of the Year at the Tiara Talent Techstars Awards. Now, as I said earlier, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, I'm delighted to be joined today by a couple of very good friends of Clear Review as we go on this reflective journey back to the beginning of the pandemic. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to really take a slightly different view and to take a look at some of the things that have happened through slightly different lens, and in particular through the lens of a couple of really amazing people leaders that we know really very well. So I'm delighted to welcome to the call today both Francis Lake, who's Head of Organisational Development at our friends at Virgin Money, and Amanda Grant, who's the Chief Product Officer at Advance. Now, I'll start just by saying thanks both of you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I know you're both big advocates of continuous performance management and really good friends, hopefully, of Clearview. And I'll come to you kind of first, Francis, if that's okay. Perhaps just before we go back on this reflective journey, it might help if you just gave us a little bit of background on yourself. And in particular, tell us a little bit about where your passion for continuous performance management originally came from.
Sure, that's brilliant. Thanks, Nick, and thanks for inviting me to join the session. So in my role at Virgin Money, I kind of lead all the parts of people practice that are, I kind of think as the progressive side. So I think of my role as doing everything that either makes work better for people or people better in work. So things like performance, talent, leadership, inclusion, culture, learning. I always forget one at least, so I'll stop there. So it's for a long time, what I've been really interested in is how you help people be at their best in work. And my team and I talk about our job as killing off empty corporate rituals. And I think there's a lot of them, things that started as sensible practice with an aim in mind, and then over time have become just a ritual that you go through that doesn't have an impact. And in my mind, classic performance management, that is the absolutely heart of that. So when I joined what was CYBG in 2016, the first thing I was asked to do was have a go at performance management. So it's kind of rubbing my hands with glee, to be honest, as the opportunity to properly, create a performance approach that was about improving performance, was about helping people get better at their jobs. And then I think what we've seen, we started working at Clearview and went live in 2017. What we've seen since then is the benefits of using that as the bedrock of your people approach, and then building on top of it. So yeah, I should stop there.
Awesome, thank you very much. I absolutely love the idea of killing off corporate rituals. That's exactly. I think for those people who have seen some of our other webinars this year, there's some other corporate rituals actually that we're now kind of bringing front and centre. So look forward to talking a bit more later on. And Amanda, perhaps if you don't mind, the same question to yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chief Product Officer at Advance. So I'm responsible for looking after our, overall product strategy and bringing a team of product managers who, have very diverse product lines together and improving everything that they do. And I'm a bit of a newbie to continuous performance management, to be honest. We've always had a playbook at Advance with our objectives, and product management have generally had a good rollout of that and reviewed them regularly and adjusted them. But Clearview kind of took that to a whole new level for us. It brings into the mix, the feedback and the personal development piece, which, probably weren't really taken into account as much as they should have been on a regular basis with people. So that really took us to a whole new level. We also had some feedback. We do a regular employee engagement survey, and one of the areas was to improve, personal development. So it was just the right time to kind of bring this all into the mix, really, with the deployment of Clearview. I'm really passionate about giving people a framework that allows them to own their own personal development, but for us as managers to really facilitate that with them. We had a lot of kind of, I'm not sure what to start, I'm not sure where to start with my personal development. So that was a really big focus for us. And it's just been a really exciting journey to see people grasp the idea of this and how they bring it into their everyday working. So a newbie, but a passionate newbie to the area.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that. And I know particularly when at that point of getting your hands on the concept of continuous performance management, you had quite a big group of people you were working with. So if I'm right, sort of 800 people in the organisation directly working for you. So it was a really interesting kind of case in point, actually, particularly doing it in lockdown as well, which we'll come back to later on. Now, I think sadly I've just ruined this for myself a little bit because the slides spun on a little bit. But I did have a word with the marketing team here yesterday, and I asked them to try to create me a kind of really interesting visual that would encapsulate, and I think the brief I gave them was, I want something that encapsulates the difficult and lonely journey that has been the kind of leadership experience for some, not everybody, but that view of the people leader working their way through the past 18 months. And although I did accidentally press the button too early, this is what they came up with. And this was originally a draft, but actually I thought it encapsulated it perfectly. So I said, that's absolutely fine, just keep it the way it is. And I think just before I kind of dive into some of the things I want to talk to you both about today, just to bring it back for the audience for a second, just to kind of remind us of where we've been, not that I probably need to, but think just, sometimes when you say it out loud, it's you suddenly start to think of things that you'd forgotten. So you've got this long and kind of winding and bumpy road that I think our people leaders sometimes have been through. They've had so much thrown at them that it's this wearisome, troubled journey that we've been helping them navigate. But there's so much that happened. We've been through lockdowns. We've had to convert spare rooms or hallways, in my case, into makeshift offices. Some of us not allowed to work at all, not allowed to work at all. Businesses partially, completely closing down. The popularization of the concept, and certainly the new word for me, this concept of furlough, business continuity plans not being planned anymore, but actually we're doing them, spinning up cloud IT services everywhere, rolling out applications across the organization, somehow keeping the lights on, the plate spinning, managing a return to work policy, locking down again, trying to keep people motivated, replanning return to the office policies, thinking about the cultural change that is hybrid working, working out what role the office plays in the future, dealing with growing burnout, now dealing with the common theme of all the conversations I'm having, dealing with increased attrition rates. And I haven't even said the Brexit word yet. Oh, actually did just say it, sorry. But even now, this isn't over, right? So in many cases, we're dealing with actual labour shortages, supply chain crises. It's easy to see how your people leader might feel a little bit like the wonderful graphic that the team came up with yesterday. And that's really, I guess the journey that I want to go on and I'm hoping both my guests today can help me reflect on some of these issues as we try to identify what we've learned and really what's next. And with that, we will stop sharing the slides so that we can see each other a little bit better. Now I'm going to go right back to the start and have to admit, I quite like, I don't know if you guys are like me, but quite like to think back to the kind of pre-pandemic days. And when I do, it's a really weird memory I'm going to share. It's one weird thing I remember really clearly, but I have this really clear memory. It's about 3 years ago of being on a Skype call, if you remember Skype. And this was back in the day when I was part of an HR leadership team, kind of split across 2 sites. And Skype calls, generally speaking, were done individually. But this was a particular day, and we had I think a brand new member of our team joining. And unusually, that new member of the team, as they joined the Skype call, had their camera switched on. And this was the first time I'd ever been in a meeting where anybody had a camera switched on. And naturally, everybody else on that call decided, well, we better put our cameras on as well. And we all enjoyed our first ever camera on, as in not in 2 video conference rooms, a camera on experience. And I distinctly remember coming off that call thinking, oh my word, that was awful. That is never going to catch on. There's no way that that's going to become a thing. Boy, did I get that one wrong. But so that's my kind of start point when I think about all the things that have happened. But I'd like to come to you first, Amanda, if that's okay, and take you right back to the start of this whole experience, to the very early days of the pandemic, when we realised we're going to need to this is about pivoting now to a new way of working. What was your kind of immediate reaction? What did you see as the immediate challenges as a people leader, kind of looking after such a big group of people at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first few weeks it was business continuity. Like many organisations, we have that mix of office-based staff, flexible and fully remote. But there were certain functions which were very traditionally office-based, and we had that with some of our development community, particularly out in India. So the focus originally was just about the basics of getting people home with the right equipment. You know, could we get them connected up? Can they actually have a reasonable working environment being at home? So it was that business continuity piece that definitely the first few weeks of lockdown was really, you know, to try and make sure that that worked really well for us. And we did a really good job of that in the main. So then it was shifting to, okay, what do we need to change now to really support people more? You know, how do we support people with children trying to teach at home, with relatives living at home, people who are on their own and feel isolated? It was all about dealing with the people challenges then for us as an organisation. Those were the two main things that I think, you know, I immediately reflected on in that first, you know, 3 to 6 weeks of being in lockdown.
Yeah, interesting. You've reminded me, actually, not that I need reminding of the whole homeschooling thing. This is kind of what wiped from my memory, to be honest, but I still have, I still get anxious thinking back about it. I remember, you know, certainly at the beginning of the whole journey, thinking and trying to watch in particular, you know, what was happening in perhaps different parts of the world. I remember that, you know, definitely a time where this felt like this was going to be a relatively short-term thing, and we were going to, everything was going to go back to normal. But actually, you know, what's happened's been obviously clearly quite profound. And I think McKinsey have coined quite an interesting term. They call it the quickening, which is the idea that actually in that early period of lockdown, we went through 10 years worth of change in 90 days. So Francis, I mean, looking back now, when do you think you realised how fundamentally the pandemic would actually change the way we work? You know, what was the point when you thought, actually, this is profound?
Yeah, I think we were pretty quick. There's a point, so it's in May 2020, and our chief exec said, we are not going to go back to the office. We're going to become a virtual organisation. So that was what, I guess, eight weeks in. But like the Quickening, we'd seen it by that period. We'd seen 6 years worth of customer uptake of digital, so which for us is 2 strategy cycles. I think we'd launched more business banking products in that 8 weeks to support all the various government schemes than we've probably had in the last 3 years. So you'd seen this incredible kind of shift in our customer behaviour. And banks have always been kind of, we've known this kind of move towards digital kind of happening. And it just accelerated it so much. So there's that point. And then there's also another piece around the same time where there's this incredible book written in 2019 called The Psychology of Pandemics. It's by a Canadian academic. So it was like, it came out like 3 months before COVID. And it's all about SARS, avian flu, all of those kind of impacts. And you start to look into that, and there's things like, you know, studies that suggest 44% of SARS patients ended up with PTSD over the 3 years that follow. And so it was that early we were starting to go, okay, even if the pandemic's over by summer, you know, at whatever point we thought it would be, we're going to think the psychological impacts are going to be massive. And particularly for those where we're knowledge workers and you rely on people's brains, the impact's going to be acute. So it was probably around that kind of May time when we're going, customer behaviour's changed, digital's transforming things. We aren't going to go back to the office, and we're going to have to start paying attention now to mental well-being in a way that we never have done before. And then God knows what was that, 17 months of hard work have followed.
Yeah, significantly more, I imagine, than 17 months of effort had to go into that. And I think that concept of the psychological impact of well-being is obviously something that's surfaced, and something I'm going to try and dive in kind of on shortly. Just before we do that, I think one of the things that certainly throughout the kind of conversation that we've had this year that we've talked about was that actually even pre-pandemic in the UK, we had a pretty systematic challenge, and it's easy to forget this, but a pretty systematic problem around engagement generally. So according to Gallup, only 11% of people in the UK were actively engaged at work, even before any of this. So, I mean, Amanda, in the early phase of remote working, I distinctly remember that one of the things that was talked about in order to keep staff engaged, or the focus was really on trying to prevent things like isolation. If you remember, we had Zoom parties, even with kind of family and friends. I mean, pretty much my family and friends, we still only talk on Zoom. It's kind of like it more, but equally that kind of behaviour happened in the early part of lockdown. I mean, what did you see or do differently for your people in the early part? And God forbid, let's hope we don't. If it happens again, what would you potentially think about doing differently next time?
Yeah, I think for me as a people leader and a very diverse group of people and large, that leadership at scale, it was all around, communication, tooling, planning, and communicating that out to the rest of the business. We introduced Teams. We used to use Skype, as you sort of said, and we introduced Teams quite early on. But I think, when you get new tooling, if you don't introduce it with clear guidance, sometimes they grow arms and legs, and before you know it, you're finding Teams confusing. So I think in hindsight, some of the tooling that we rolled out, we probably could have had more guidelines around, and that would have given people a little bit of better, guidance on it from a usage perspective. We actually scored really well when we did our surveys around how much communication we were giving to people. So we absolutely upped that level of communication. And we scored quite well on the feedback on that. So, more and more time spending with your teams, I think, is a reflection. When you can't physically visit an office, particularly, our staff in India, it meant we really had to up our visibility game as people leaders. I was very visible in our team chats, doing skip level meetings, doing drop-in for chit chat with the CPO, town halls, just more and more of that time spent on your organisational health, I think, was really important. I think what I'm still reflecting on is that, always on culture, meeting fatigue. I still think there's quite a lot of work to do to get the right balance in organisations with that going forward. So those are my key reflections.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it was a started that question. I was talking a little bit about, I think one of the things we were worried about very early was this idea of isolation and loneliness. And part of trying to connect us clearly has been about technology. But actually there's lots of talk now around how that, has that happened at such a pace that we've done it without thinking about the impact. And there's this idea, and I know that a kind of subtle plug here, I know that it was Advanced who published the Workforce Trends Survey report a couple of months ago. And in there's some really interesting stuff around things like notifications. So I think it's a third of people now say they get too many notifications from apps and it's preventing them from being productive. And that's kind of almost a spandrel, I think, from some of those early efforts to really, really drive and make sure people were talking enough. And we're now almost in a point where we're questioning, actually, we're spending so long in meetings talking, are we actually making enough time for really productive focus? I think that's super interesting. So Francis, I mean, looking back, I mean, obviously engagement is a much broader issue than just the concept of connecting people. What do you really think we learned about engagement generally during that period? And I mean, what do you think, in the long run, looking back, do you think this shared experience might have improved employee engagement generally, or do you still see those headwinds?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we saw probably 6 or 9 months of benefit. And I think now the impact of just weariness is really creating a drain. And that weariness isn't necessarily driven by the organisation, it's driven by just because the blur between life and work is just gone. It's kind of like, I'm just fed up with, goodness, cancelling my holiday for the 4th time, or whatever it may be. I think one of the things right up front, though, that we kind of got quite quickly was there was a huge amount of information available. In those early days, there was government briefings seemingly constantly. The BBC had a huge amount of stuff. There's that American university that had all the stats that seemed to be kind of funding out. And then we had loads of kind of corporate things. And what we were finding was, there was this huge amount of information, but what colleagues were struggling with was meaning, and what was it okay to do. And because they're all on their own, they can't turn to the person at the desk next to them that they would have done before to create measurement. So we started doing a lot of sessions with people that didn't really have any agenda or any content. It was just kind of surgeries, like, you're a parent, okay, well, let's get people talking about how they're coping with homeschooling or how they're feeling they're not coping. And then quite quickly we clocked that all of the people leaders had all of those issues, but were suddenly expected to almost act like counsellor. And for lots of them, that was a huge stretch. And they'd got, kids coming in and everything else. So we started talking to our people leaders about that need to put your oxygen mask on first. And we're similarly just running sessions around helping them feel that it's okay, you're not going to get this all right. Just here's a few little things to try and do. And I guess through that over time, what I would say our focus then has really shifted to being about the simple actions that people leaders should do with their people to engage. Because it's, I think what really stood out was there's so many management or leadership theories or programs, and there's almost always this drive for the next thing that's in a paper, rather than that focus on just treating people well and treating them right, giving them a sense of meaning. Lots of the things that are actually at the heart of clear review, of clarity on goals, getting aligned, regular feedback, meaningful conversations. Just doing that, we've found, has been the most constructive thing, I think.
Yeah, it's uncanny, actually. Several things you've just said, Francis, but it's uncanny that you talked about putting your own oxygen mask on first, because I think that's actually language that Advanced also used directly with the leadership community, funnily enough. And I think you're absolutely right to call out conversations, and actually human conversations seem to be, certainly for me, something that certainly if we look at the data that sits in clear review, we can see it happening on a much more frequent basis. I think it's really interesting. Equally, I think that weariness that you talk about, that blur of life and work. I had a conversation with someone last week who talked about, it's not really working at home, it's living at work, that we're all kind of, I think, a bit tired of at the moment. I know that on one of our earlier webinars, we shared a view, we're talking about what's really driving engagement and what's really important to people. And it looks to us like, there's been a change in some of the things that people are calling out as important. And in particular, there's been a significant jump in the importance of this concept of work-life balance. So I know, again, back, just talking about the trend survey report I referenced earlier on, I think 47% of people, I'm pretty sure this is a stat, 47% of people said they're far more worried about losing work-life balance now, we think about the future, than they are about, being out of work, such as the confidence that we've got going forward. So there's been a real, as that weariness has increased, there's been a real shift suddenly in what people think is important, and I think that will be really interesting to see how that works forward. So as we kind of continue this kind of journey through the winding road that I painted on the screen earlier on, we kind of got used to, remote working kind of became normal. We had that, if you remember, that sort of almost false start where we thought everything's going to get back to normal, and then we had the government briefings we talked about earlier and said no, we need to kind of slow back down. But we are kind of that was kind of the point, I think, at which this term, or some of the conversations around hybrid working, and that term came up. So I just want to explore that for a moment. So I'm coming to you first, Amanda, if I may. As we move into this vision of the new normal, are there any things that you started doing? Are there those early things that you started doing that you'll take with you and keep doing and become day to day? I know Francis was obviously just talking about conversations, but is there anything that you've pulled out that you think actually that now is fundamental for us?
yeah, I think particularly that visibility as a people leader within the organisation, particularly when you're at scale, you know, you have to be visible to your teams, you have to be visible to the organisation, and work really hard at that. It is quite different, I think, to, you know, being able to pop into an office and stand in front of 50, 60 people. So keeping that up. And also just keeping people aligned to those key messages and what we're trying to drive to as an organisation. How am I seen as a people leader? Those are all the things that I will, you know, really keep the energy up around. I think just team socials are so important. You know, people absolutely want to connect on that personal level to other people. So you've got to make space for that, and you've got to make time for that with your teams. And that trust and flexibility, you know, we've you know, you don't have to work super set hours. We trust you to get the job done. You know, how do we change that as we go forward? So taking time to switch off, well-being, getting that balance right. I think that's all really important things to me as a people leader going forward. And coming back to kind of, you know, being agile with your goals. You know, that graph shows we don't know what tomorrow will bring. So being able to kind of have that regular check-in with your team, being agile about what they're focused on, that's, for me, is, you know, really important.
Yeah, and I think there's no doubt, is there, that as we kind of, you know, went through that period in and out of lockdown, you know, that you know, the impact of, I think, that visibility you talk about, and that clarity, or that, you know, ability to switch direction, but in a really clear way, that I think continuous performance management afforded, certainly afforded advance at that time, was really interesting. One of the other things, we touched on this earlier, Francis, talked a little bit about well-being. So, you know, one of the things that was pretty clear to me at the time was that, again, as you said, as this sort of period of 6 to 9 months benefits, and everyone thought, this is kind of fun, I get to not have the commute anymore, that kind of started to wear off. This concept of burnout has become much more of a topic. In fact, I was looking even this morning, I think Indeed did a survey recently where as many as 53% people said that they've experienced some form of some sort of burnout since the start of the pandemic, which seems a pretty scary number. I'm not sure it's something that we've ever really measured before, so it's difficult to put it in context. But there's no doubt that obviously well-being has come into a much sharper focus. I mean, Francis, what are your hopes for I guess, the lasting legacy, if there will be one, that the pandemic might have on how we think about well-being?
Yeah, there's I have two hopes, and I'm really in two minds at the moment on where we're going in this. Two things though, really. The first is the connection between well-being and both individual and corporate performance. Where I would say early in pandemic, great focus on well-being, but it was utterly disconnected. So you were almost getting these kind of conversations that go, how do I drive up productivity? With a kind of implication that I don't actually trust what my people are doing. And then the other side going all about well-being tech. And we were seeing calls where, you know, you'd see leaders that kind of soften their voice, they'd talk about well-being, and then they'd talk about the intensity of work and everything we've got to do, and we've got to work hard and so on. And it was a complete contrast. Whereas again, I think well-being is the fuel for performance. If you've not got well-being, you're not doing anything. So that kind of treating well-being as a means to it, and which potentially means more rest, more recovery, and so on. I'm quite a fan of professional cycling. One of the things I love in that is there's stories of, apparently Bradley Wiggins would not carry the shopping from the supermarket to the car, because they're all told when you are resting, you rest as hard as you possibly can. And I think there's things like that we need to apply. So it's that kind of really thinking about well-being as a driver for performance. And then the second one that gets right into your space, where I worry that we're getting more and more deployment of well-being stuff for yesterday's problems, where individually and collectively we've had this huge and ongoing trauma. And so getting companies thinking about how do we minimize the risk of things like PTSD for our colleagues is huge. We looked at a bit the other day, and it was less than a 53% use, but it was 21% of people said their mental health had suffered, but we could see that like 3% of our colleagues were accessing things that would support mental health. So you're going, what about the other 18%? Let alone those who haven't even been recognised. So I think there's something for companies about being much more interventionist actually on mental health, rather than it still being something we're all a bit awkward about. So yeah, well-being driving performance, and then companies getting interventionist on mental health. That's the two I'd like to see.
And interesting. I think because kind of interesting because you've said you're not sure which way it's going to go. So we're going to come back to that in a minute, because I'm going to talk about productivity, and I have a hunch maybe about your kind of dichotomy, but also just worth, I guess, a nod to, I know one of the things that we've talked about quite openly this year is the parallel that you could draw between performance at work and things like sporting performance. You talk about Bradley Wiggins. I mean, it's a wonderful example of if you look at the sports science around performance, and there's oodles of different models and methodologies, but even I think this is probably applicable to cycling, but the concept of periodization, in that you build fitness through phases which consist of adequate rest plus training load, and managing your load in order to peak for performance on a particular day. There's a lot I think that organizations could genuinely learn thinking about performance by looking at actually, funnily enough, probably cycling is probably the best example. So I think that's super interesting. I might add to that. I think probably the one thing that I additionally hope that we learn from all of this is that it's okay to normalize conversations around well-being. We don't need to. I sincerely hope that we don't lose that normalization, as you said, Amanda. Just that time, just having a conversation with each other. Just going then back a little bit, so just on the productivity piece, the other thing we've talked about, and again, a little bit like engagement, systemically, even pre-pandemic, huge productivity challenge in the UK. Nothing we seem to do seems to make us more productive, at least at the macroeconomic level. And equally, there's a lot of debate, and I think this is where you were going, Francis, so it might not be, so feel free to correct me, but there's this debate, isn't there, between different kind of approaches being taken about productivity. There's this, let's empower our people now to go and make good decisions about where and when work gets done. And then there's, actually, no, we want you in the office every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and half day on Friday, and we want to track time, and they don't seem to fit. And we've talked quite a lot about the clear review position on this, and the concept of empowerment and how performance management could enable that. Nevertheless, there's still a lot of debate and different opinions taking place. But just staying with you for a minute, Francis, if I can, just that concept and challenge around productivity. What's your view? What impact do you think the pandemic has had on productivity overall, good or bad? And actually, if you could give any organisation a piece of advice around how to think about productivity, what would that be?
Yeah, great. So I think what's happened is good teams, good functions, good businesses have benefited because they've got the fundamentals in place. And the people who could only measure productivity by seeing whether somebody was sat at the desk have suffered, because they've got no they've got no backup kind of plan. And some of that practice, there's great stories from back in the Industrial Revolution, and the phrase stealing time came from the time when factories would have one clock on the wall, and workers would try and sneak in to move the hands on the clock forward so they could get off work earlier, right? So that's and so as long as you just manage people in a way that creates no value or no intrinsic motivation for them, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get people who are just marking out the time. So there's a real fundamental thing, I think, of creating motivated people, well-aligned people who know what they're doing, will do great work. And that's the bit that I think we've really got to go after. I think you guys have done some experiments with some of the 4-day week, and some of the early things that kind of fed that. There's an economist study that said in UK, roughly 2.5 hours in a working day are productive because there's so many distractions are built in and so on. So certainly what we're trying to go after to drive productivity is work out whether is the work solo work or social work. So if it's solo work, when you need to be on your own, be on your own, get focused, turn off notifications. And the difference between having, say, a 2-hour block where you get really focused versus trying to feed it in and you've got Teams notifications and all that is massive. And then if it's social work, be clear it's social work, get people together on an equal basis, and not that kind of old hell of 6 people in the room and 2 on a spider phone, you know, all of those things. But get people in a room where they can collaborate and work effectively, or in a virtual room. I think that thing of designing the where and when in order to focus on getting the work output, that's the critical thing. We've totally avoided going after X number of days in the office or anything like that. And even for those who had time in the office, so why are you dealing in terms of a day? Like, what if it's 2 hours, 3 hours? You know, so just really trying to be where you can work most productively, both individually and collectively. I think you can't have a really simplistic solution for a really complex problem, really.
No, well, I think you're in good company, because I think, you know, certainly the clear of you position. So we've talked about this through a number of webinars. Is all about let's think about, you know, forget about policy. You can't manage hybrid work through policy, because everybody wants something very different. So whatever policy you come up with is going to not fit everybody. So actually, what you need to think about is what's the outcome to this particular task that we want to drive, and empower people to concentrate on the best outcome. And I think my favorite example is the idea of how do we do onboarding in the future. You know, we've proved that we can onboard people virtually, but it's almost certainly far better experience to have parts of that done in person. How do we empower people to do that?
Yeah,
so
we've tried to do some work. Look, in our sort of future of work, one of the things we're trying to look at is people's stage, in either life stage or work stage, and so we kind of think if you're early in role or early with an employer, you probably want more contact. Equally, if you're younger, you probably want more, you know, frankly, you know, kind of get to my point, you're old and miserable, don't want to make any new friends kind of thing. but that's really different for different people. So actually trying to build that into the way we use our offices, and trying to think about, does that mean we'll potentially have a kind of younger demographic in the offices where it's not intact teams, but it's more almost kind of people who are similar interests. I think so. It's trying to think through some of that. I think going to be a huge one. So if you guys have any answers on that, please let me know.
No, well, it's an interesting lens to think about life stage as well as, you know, we've been critically focused on. Let's just think that, you know, if everybody in the organisation understands what it is that is important work right now, understands the outcomes that are important to the organisation, what's stopping us empowering people to make choices about where and when work takes place? And I think it's getting to the heart of that problem. You did mention, Francis, you called something out that's kind of really interesting, because there is, you know, when you think about that, where do people need to be and how much, you know, measuring time and time theft, there's a lot of or an increasing amount of talk in the press around things like 4-day weeks, for example. And Amanda, I think Francis called it out. I know that, you know, within Advanced, there was a kind of real-time experiment of what happens. I think when we give people half a day a week, just say, right, please switch off. You know, I mean, perhaps you could bring that to life for me. What was the, you know, the initiative? How did it go? What was the background?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. We turned up on our kind of exec call one Monday morning, and Gordon, who's our chief exec, said, I think we should give all the staff Friday afternoons off in June, July and August as a thank you for the extra hours. And we all went, wow, that's a bit bold, maybe every other Friday, or, you know, it kind of was such a bold move, because we'd seen other companies doing wellness days, but this was every Friday for 3 months, you know. So it was a pretty bold move to try and do it. It did raise a few eyebrows. I think everybody loved the concept though, because, you know, it definitely felt like it was needed, that people needed some time back to spend with their families. It was summer, it was lighter evenings. you know, it felt like it was the right thing to do. And we did have some challenges in our business like ours, where you've got support staff who need to be on to answer customer calls and things. So it's not always as straightforward as it seems to give people time, you know, in their diaries, but we worked around it to ensure, you know, we delivered what we needed to for our customers. And the feedback in the main was amazing from our staff. You know, many just took time to chill with their family, just enjoy the sunshine, exercising. I think it made a massive difference to people's well-being. We've already committed to doing it again next year. And I think just having the knowledge that that summer, you've got that kind of break clause in your diary that actually gives you that time back. It's been hugely beneficial. You know, we didn't see, you know, a bad impact to our business. I think we only see a positive impact to our business. So it was a fantastic initiative, and you know, I'm you know, thrilled we're going to be carrying that on.
Yeah, I have to say, as well, as someone who spent, you know, considerable amount of time and energy thinking about employer brand for Advanced in my stint as Director of Talent and Reward, turns out it's a great thing to do from an employer brand perspective, because you had lots of people in the organisation I noticed were talking quite openly and very passionately, really advocating their business for that move. And I think, you know, really interesting to kind of to watch and see. And again, it feels like you know, quite a statement around trust and faith. So yeah, really exciting. Just on that, and I'm watching the clock now, so I'm conscious, and we're almost at the kind of top of the hour. But just on that theme of kind of employer brand that I've just kind of shoehorned into the conversation a little bit, perhaps. If we bring our kind of journey back up to the present, to where we are now, and all the things that we've learned, it's been really, really interesting, you know, getting you guys together to talk about this. There's this idea right now, and it's, you know, I've mentioned it a couple of times, the concept of the Great Resignation, as people are calling it. I know that, you know, again, back to the Advanced Work Trend Survey earlier on, I know that the piece of research in there suggested as many as 50% of us considering changing jobs right now. And again, that's a measure that I don't think has been particularly well measured in the past, but where it has been measured in the past, it looks like that's significantly higher than we would normally expect. And obviously, we've got record UK vacancy numbers right now. So there's obviously a lot of hiring happened. I'm interested in the way that you know, you guys think both Advanced and Virgin Money have described themselves to you know, to potential new employees has changed. So Francis, come to you first. I don't know, you know, off the back of that kind of quickening and all the things you've talked about. You're talking about different things now.
Yeah, I think we are. And just as you were talking there, Nick, it struck me as well, one of the things I guess we haven't talked about in these last 18 months. The other thing I'd say is got really, the focus on inclusion and diversity has got, is stepped on in a similar fashion. So there are things where we attract people from, we've really worked hard on, like looking at what kind of candidates we get from different places. Being able to work remotely means we're so much more open, and we're very clear. Kind of tell us where you want to work. And I think there's actually, I think that flexibility is contributing to some of the quickening, because we're predominantly based in kind of Scotland and the north of England, where typically salary rates are lower than the southeast. So while we're going, we can hire from everywhere. Then there's kind of competitors in London and the southeast going, oh, there's cheap people up there that we can hire. So that's very much a double-edged sword. And we are really talking about, the way we describe it is a life more virgin. We're trying to talk about our ways of working as, so it's about life rather than it's just about work, and being more virgin, more of that kind of sort of playful experiential spirit that we can kind of tap into, you know, a brand that has spaceships, right? So really trying to talk about some of those things and the flexibility that it can bring, the way of syncing it in with your life, the way that it's about you designing your life. And we've got more things that are going to come down the track in the next month or so. So really trying to change that kind of description and change the paradigm. But I think it's really hard, because we've got so many years of thinking, work's a place I go to Monday to Friday, you know, that actually trying to describe something different means people lose lots of their points of reference. And I think that's quite a hard thing for us in the next little while. But yeah, definitely trying to be just much more, tell us how you want to work, where you want to work and what you want to do is it's a great shift.
Amanda, I mean, kind of similar themes, do you think, with the team at Advanced, or different types of conversations happening now?
Yeah, no, very similar. I think people are really thinking carefully about where they want to go and work. So, the culture of the organisation that they're going to join is very important to people. So we've just produced our ESG report for Advanced, and that will really help people understand what we stand for, what are our core principles, what is it like to work at Advanced. And I think that's been, it's not just a document we produced, that's been very much a shift in our organisation for the last 18 months, 2 years, to really focus on some of those areas. And that's just the combination of that we can now, very easily talk to, our talent pool around that. I think that flexible working piece is really important, because you're not just restricted to talent near offices, as you sort of said, Francis. So it opens us up to a much more diverse workforce, people who want to be able to work from home because of either, family reasons, or it could be disability reasons, for example. You're opening up so much more talent to your organisation. And I think, we've really got to sell the benefit of a strong team culture that's not office-based, because that's what's going to matter to people. And particularly for me around product management, there's not many organizations where you have this community of product managers, because usually you have one product for companies. We've got lots and lots of products. So, that's a real benefit for us. And we've got to sell that as part of our organization, that you're part of a community. You're not on your own. There's always lots of other people to ask for help, share great experiences, share a learning culture. And I think those are the things that, for me personally, are how I'm going to change the way we talk about recruitment. That those are the things that I'd focus on in my areas.
So I know firsthand just how those conversations are changing, how quickly they are, and I haven't got time to go into them, but my own hopes, a little bit like your hopes, around wellbeing, Francis, for how we think about describing the employee experience moving forward. Just one more really quick fire question, but kind of conscious that we're almost out of time. So I know, and clearly we're both huge advocates for continuous performance management. As you reflect on everything that we've been through, how would you describe, and I'll try and get you to do it in one sentence, might be impossible, how would you describe the impact that continuous performance management has had on the organisation through this period of time? Francis, sorry to put you on the spot.
I think it's been huge. I don't think we could have got through the last 18 months had we been just running on a standard performance thing. We've been well-being into conversations for 4 years. The ability to line your teams up and realign quickly is hugely helpful. When you're working remotely, the ability to give frequent and immediate feedback. I did it with someone today. We were in a town hall session and I was able to give somebody feedback on a question they asked immediately. It's brilliant. And then that ability to come back together and have very personal conversations. I think it could not have been designed better for the crisis that we've been through, I think.
Again, that's a good question.
Yeah, so I think for me, I just reflect the same sort of thing. I think it's made the conversation very front of mind with our employees, in terms of providing real clarity between the manager and the employee about what we're driving towards, how we're going, what we need to change, etc. And I think you just mentioned feedback, because when you're doing that conversation, you've got feedback, performance and personal goals, and you're visiting them on a regular basis. The conversation's so much more clearer and transparent between them, and that builds huge trust, I think, between the employee and the manager. So hugely beneficial.
Guys, it's been really brilliant. I know I'm absolutely flat out of time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have too, and I hope the audience have. It's not often we get a chance to do this, so I'm really, again, grateful for your time and insight.